Okay, thank you, councillors. There are 5 of us here, 6. Okay. With leave of the chamber, we have a person in the gallery who has been waiting a long time to make a submission and can't wait for the item. So I would like to invite Adam Newman to come up now and make a submission. It's a submission in relation to 8.7. And so rather than keep Adam waiting longer, we will hear his submission, which, as I said, is on item 8.7, electoral representation review. Welcome, Adam. Thank you.
Yes, my name's Adam. Thank you, Mayor Rennie. My submission is, as you said, in regards to item 8.7 on the agenda. I want to speak about this issue because I've been somewhat involved in the process run by the Electoral Commission. I made a response submission and spoke at the public hearing for this review. And my preference was that option A was the preferred option, which is the outcome that the VEC has also agreed on. And so my recommendation to council would also be that council approve of the proposed option to the Minister for Local Government in this report. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that submission, Adam. And I would also like to congratulate you for the very fine submission that you actually made to the VEC submissions process. I had the privilege of hearing it, and you showed remarkable knowledge of the process and made a very valuable contribution. So we welcome that submission tonight. So councillors, we will move on with item 8.4 in the agenda, and that relates to assistance. Councillor Greco.
I have an alternate motion to the motion that's here in the report, and I'd like to move that.
Certainly, thank you, Councillor Greco. We'll just get that on screen and then we'll see if there's a seconder for that motion. Thank you. So, no, we haven't got it. So, Councillor Greco's motion includes the officer recommendation plus 0.5. Is there a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Lawrence.
Might I ask a question, Mayor, and excuse me?
Yes, Councillor Messina.
Just in relation to item number 5, when we look at urgent report on rate relief, does Councillor Greco refer to council rate relief? Is that what he's referring to? Just want some clarification what that rate relief means.
That's my understanding, but I'll confirm that. Yes, that is what Councillor Greco intends. So, Councillor Greco, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Look, I put forward this alternate motion with point number 5, and just to start off with, I thank the officers for compiling this report and putting up all the other suggestions that have been put up there. Look, councillors, I've been speaking to some of the traders in Reservoir, and the situation is really, really serious out there. I've got 2 emails here that were just emailed to me tonight just before coming to the meeting, which prompted me to put up this motion rather than adopting what they've suggested. I've just thought, well, we need to have some further consideration in relation to the items that they're suggesting, because it hasn't come through the officer recommendation. Look, just to give some background, is that what the traders are saying, particularly the traders on the Broadway side, is that this is devastating their business. Some of the traders are actually behind on their rent. One trader said to me just today that they're 2 months behind on their rent. They've never been behind on their rent. And actually, he's worse off by about $10,000 up until this stage relative to other years. And so it's really having a toll and effect on the traders there. The traders even went out to demonstrate, to actually block the trains and do all sorts of stuff because of the desperation that they're facing. And basically what the traders are saying is that this situation is not the fixing up of a footpath or a road that, you can live with that with a week, 10 days, 2 weeks of disruption. Here we're talking about a disruption that will persist at least to about March next year, according to the timelines. And it's dramatically affecting these small businesses and affecting their, their stress levels, their health levels. And some of them are saying they're not going to be able to see the other side of the rail crossing once the rail crossing is completed. They've also pointed out to me that some of the initiatives that are already taken place just don't go far enough. Like recently there was a Halloween event. They're saying, one of the traders I was speaking to today saying it just didn't bring anything. It didn't add anything. And the reason why he's saying that it didn't add anything is that because no amount of advertising, can bring customers to access the precinct, because the precinct is actually cut off. And this is adversely affecting their business. And so they're saying to me,
10 seconds.
And I'll sum up with this, is that they're asking for some sort of a process to get some sort of rate relief from council in order to assist
Thank
their
you, that's
businesses.
time. Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Lawrence.
Madam Mayor, Mayor Rennie, quickly, I mean, in Australia, we do things often the way we've done them since 1901 in relation to rents, commercial rents. In other countries, in New Zealand, they do it in a different way. The rent is set by the turnover of the business. So the prudent landlords attract good businesses and then they get a percentage of that. In Australia, we sacrifice small business with crushing rents. Now, this situation at the moment is that every trader in Broadway previously was in an area where you could at least get across from the wealthier part of and the more settled part of Reservoir could get across and get their services. They've effectively had their trade cut in half by the roadworks at the moment, and it's gone, and the rail works. In addition to that, a renewed Summerhill is a superior, and I have to admit I do shop there, shopping offer that has been developed in recent years with free, and I don't even know if there's any limit, much of a limit, parking. So that means what's occurred is, one, they've lost West Reservoir traders, West customers. They're just too far to drive right round to go there anymore. And number two, they've been cannibalised by a shopping centre that's developed just not far away. So this is why some of them have said that they've got 80% turnover decline. They are not exaggerating.
10 seconds.
They have been hammered by two actual events. We should revalue their properties. We should slash their rents, because those valuations are now false.
Lawrence, that's time. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Messina.
Whilst I understand the sentiment of this particular assistance, item number 8.4, I can't vote for the addition to item number 5. Small business, economic development, I believe in, and I've been working with them for many, many years. I was a small business owner myself. However, we have to go back to the root cause. The root cause is that council is not responsible for the elevated rail. And why should we stop at the Reservoir traders when we can have a look at what happened down in Plenty Road with the shutdown of Plenty Road for 2 weeks? So why should we stop and provide a rate incentive for Reservoir traders? We can also be doing that for the Preston traders, and we have the elevated rail that's going through for removal of the crossings in Preston. Council is not responsible for the decline in commercial income for something infrastructure program that council has not arranged. It was done by the state government. If we're looking for an incentive or a rebate, it should come from the state government. It's not council's responsibility to undertake that. Whilst I understand that they're struggling, I understand that revenue is down. However, this will set a precedence. Did we offer it to any other traders in the area? Did we offer it to Tyler Street? Because at the moment, for 2 weeks, we had nobody coming down Plenty Road to Tyler Street. We can't section traders in the community and then not offer it to others. So I cannot support it based on that. Whilst I understand the importance of revenue and that keeps the commercial viability of providing disposable income from household traders as well as the owners and businesses of the particular area, it's not the
10
solution to the
seconds.
problem.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Are there any further speakers? No. Councillor Greco, you have a right of reply.
Thank you, Mayor Reddy. Look, just in terms of the points that have been raised, this motion does not say that we are, as a result of voting for this motion, is not that we're going to be providing rate relief. Let's get it clear. What this motion says is that to call a special meeting, seek a report from officers to consider whether we can provide some rate relief to the residents. So we're not making a decision here about what that rate relief could be. Because it's such an urgent matter, and because we're leading into Christmas, these people need some sort of assistance. So let's have a meeting on the 18th, a special meeting, where we can get the officers to prepare a report very quickly about what our options are in terms of what can and what we can't provide as rate relief to these residents, and for that then to be considered at that meeting. So we're not making a decision, let's be clear about that. The second point about other areas, yeah, I acknowledge that other areas we have done, there has been roadworks or activity in other areas. That's very true. But nothing of this, there's no precedent for this. Other areas, like I mentioned, may have had a week closure to fix up a road or fix up footpaths. Traders are prepared to live with that. They know that. But here we're talking about over a year of shutdown of a street that's been affected. And I think both the state government and the council has underestimated the financial damage that this project is inflicting
10 seconds.
on the residents. So on that basis, I just ask councillors vote for this motion so we can have a more considered discussion at a special meeting in relation to this matter.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. I'll now put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That motion is lost. Councillor Newton?
Can I move the officer's recommendation for this item?
Thank you. We'll get that on the screen. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor McCarthy? Councillor Newton?
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So I absolutely acknowledge that this has been very disruptive for the traders of Broadway and of Edward Street in Reservoir. So the crossing has been closed for probably a good 4 months or so now, and it's going to be another 2 months until the 20th when the work ends. And reading this report, I'm actually really impressed by how much work council has already done in this space. And I'm really pleased that we have a report that really just shows clearly how much council will be doing. And really to Councillor Messina's point before, this is not a council project. This is a state government project. So this is something where it's a very, very good thing for our area. It's something where council has had a lot of input into. We've had a structure plan on this that's wanted this for a long time. We know that this is going to really lift the area, and I actually think that the LRXP has done a very good job they're doing a lot of work at night, and they're getting this done as soon as they can. So while absolutely acknowledging that this is having an effect on the traders, what we do have in this motion is we have support. So we're encouraging businesses to participate in the Lightsaver program, where they can save $300 a year or so on their power bills. I really, really like the idea of the on-site business mentoring, where they can get 4 hours on site. And also we know that this is something that will support the traders while acknowledging that this is a difficult time for them. And I am very glad that we will also be doing another trading event to support the shoppers. And I have been impressed by what I've seen with LRXP. So myself, Councillor Greco and Councillor Lawrence were down there the other day for a councillor meet and greet, and we had the LRXP there too. and they were giving away cannoli from Il Pasticino, which is in Edward Street. So I'm definitely seeing that they're out and about. They're doing what we can, and I would really encourage all residents to go down there, whether you live in Reservoir or not.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor McCarthy.
In the interest of time, I'll reserve my right, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers?
I just have a question, and I don't know why I'm doing this. To what extent, to the officers, and maybe you can respond as well, to what extent have we engaged the member for Preston on this specific issue?
Thank you for that question, Councillor Lassurf. I'll refer that to Ms Olivier.
I think, through you, Mayor Rennie, we've been doing a lot of engagement. I must admit that a lot of that has been through the LXRP recently, because actually they've been working well and taking advice from council about how to make some of their programs better and more effective. So while we've kept the local members up to date, there hasn't sort of been anything that's actively escalated recently.
I can also state that I've written to the local member, Robin Scott, on this issue, outlining the difficulties that have been experienced.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just have a question.
Yes, Councillor Greco.
This is a question that a trader asked me to put. In the report, it mentions that the council has allocated $750,000 towards the rail crossings and providing assistance of various nature. I just want to know how much of that $750,000 has currently been spent.
Thank you. I'll pass that to Ms Olivier.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, that funding is essentially roughly spread across the financial year, so we're kind of a third of the way through the financial year. At the moment, most of the effort is directed towards Reservoir, because it's obviously the the most disruptive part of that period. Without sort of knowing all of the details, I do know that the kind of emphasis of our promotional effort has been happening and is about to happen up to Christmas. So I expect that promotional budget to be front-loaded at this time of year.
Thank you. Councillor Greco? Sorry, did you want to speak? No, I was handing
No,
you
just to clarify then, is that so we've only gone through a third of the amount? I just want to get a dollar figure, that's all I want to get. Yeah.
So through you, Mayor Rennie, we've essentially designed a program and committed to a large part of that program. So, you know, the program in this report that's set out to Christmas is committed and locked in, like it's prepared and underway, and we've got materials and supplies and all those sorts of things. So while we haven't paid all of those bills, actually that work is clearly committed. Without having the full details in front of me, my guess is that in terms of actual outgoings to date, it would be closer to a half than a third.
Thank you. Are there further speakers to this motion?
I have an amendment.
Yes, Councillor Lawrence?
My amendment is point 5. I'm just writing it, but basically that council receives a further report at the next meeting about options for rate relief for Broadway traders.
Is that acceptable to the mover?
No.
No. Is there a seconder for that?
Bit of wording? Yeah.
Okay. I believe it's very similar to yours, Councillor Greco, but not at a special meeting, at the next meeting. Okay, I think the words that Councillor Lawrence has said are very slightly different from what's on screen, but the meaning is not. That's exactly what's intended. Is there a seconder for that amendment?
No, I'm happy to accept the amendment.
So you're happy to second it?
No, it's an amendment that...
It's an amendment that needs a seconder. So Councillor... Okay. So I've had an amendment. I have a mover and a seconder for this motion. Councillor... No.
And I'm happy to accept it.
No, sorry, Councillor Greco, you can't accept it because you're not the mover or the seconder.
No, I'm the mover of the original motion.
No, you're not. No, the motion, sorry, just to be clear, the motion that you proposed was lost. That motion is no longer on the table. The motion that is now on the table was moved by Councillor Newton and seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lawrence has proposed this amendment. Councillor Williams has seconded the amendment now. So we'll proceed with debate on the amendment. Councillor Lawrence.
Mayor Rennie, yes. Look, I don't want to go into the technicalities of it all. We understand we have a 1.75 percent multiple. That is a 75% multiple on top of traders. It's quite large rates in the whole of northern suburbs. We have, obviously, that's a differential adopted by council. It can't be easily changed. We have rebates in place, complicated ones in terms of solar saver, pensioners and other things. We know they take a long time to come into place. So I'm not proposing to debate how we can give rate relief, and obviously we have to reflect how we charge rates, which is based on property and land values, not turnover, as you know, is done in other places. So what I'm putting forward here is that we actually look at how we can extend some relief, and one of those options may be that a deferral of rates, and we seek from the Minister exemption to not charge them interest on those deferrals. That would give them a chance to put off $2,000 or $3,000 till next year, and that helps certainly as a small business person inside this city. That can help a lot. But obviously some people don't want to do that if they get the statutory interest rate on it. So I'm not sure that we know that we can't help them, but I think it would strengthen that we're examining everything we can do while we're asking the state government to do something.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Williams.
Obviously, this is not a straightforward situation, and we don't find ourselves obviously in this position on a regular basis, but we do need to consider people's financial and mental health. And I'm sure that from feedback that not only I have received, but definitely councillors in that ward have had a numerous amount of contact with the businesses in the area. And I think that what we have here in front of us tonight, that it's important that we need to support and look at other avenues to ensure that we are behind the businesses in Darebin, and that we're going to try and do whatever we can to support them in whatever way that we can. So on that note, I'm happy to accept the amendment and that we can go forward.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there any further speakers on the amendment?
I just have a question, if I may, Mayor.
Yes, Councillor McCarthy.
It's just arising out of something that Councillor Lawrence said in his statement. Just if I can just get clarification, the option to defer the payment of rates that is available to residents, can I just confirm that that's also available through the same mechanism to commercial ratepayers?
Thank you, Ms Bishop.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Through you, at the moment our policy states that it's not available. It's only for residential.
Thank you. Are there further speakers to the amendment?
Can I ask a subsequent question just in relation to that? In relation to making that available to commercial property owners, could we just get an indication of what the process is for that to be altered?
Thank you. Ms Bishop?
Through you, Mayor Rennie, we'd have to look at the obligations under the Act and also a new policy. And there could be, depending on what appetite council had, it may be that they were seeking a deferment period. So postponing for 2 or 3 weeks payment or 2 or 3 months, I'm not sure, so I can't go into any more detail than just from the conversation today.
Thank you. Are there further speakers? to the amendment?
Sorry, I just need to ask a further question if I can, just to get clarity.
Yes.
The ability for council to amend its rates policy, if I'm correct, would require approval from the minister, to the relevant minister to do so. If I can just get clarification in relation to that, and what is the time frame for that to occur, and to get a response from the minister in relation to rate deferment.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Ms Bishop?
Through you, Mayor Rennie, rate deferment process is quite complicated because we have to also demonstrate a clear benefit to the community. We also have to do an analysis around the risks, precedent that's already been touched on, compliance with the Act, with other various areas when you're looking at changes, whether it's concessions, and also a process through the Audit Committee as well. So it's not something that we can turn around within a matter of weeks. There is a significant process there.
Okay. Thank you, Ms Bishop. Councillor McCarthy, can
Mayor,
I just check?
sorry,
I had before you
Sure,
stood at
please,
that time,
please.
I had Councillor Greco and Councillor Messina had indicated. Can I just check whether that's wanting to speak to the amendment? Okay, so I've got two councillors that had indicated they wish to speak to the amendment. I'll go to Councillor Greco first.
But may I ask, if there are further questions, I welcome them because it's actually clarifying issues in my mind before actually speaking to them. So if Councillor McCarthy has any further questions, please go ahead and ask, because I really value the information that's coming forward to us.
Thank you. So I'll move to, is that okay, Councillor Messina?
I actually have a question.
Okay, so we'll move to your question then.
And thank you for some. I actually want to say thank you to Councillor McCarthy because he actually had some questions, but gave me a 360-degree spin on the actual clause number 5. Rate relief to me indicated a rate discount, but it
Councillor
doesn't.
Messina, just
Yes.
make sure you're on a question, because otherwise
And the
it sounds
question
like you're
is,
speaking.
so can I have some clarification in relation to what rate relief actually means? Because that I think we need to clarify.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Messina. I'll hand over to Ms Bishop again for that.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Rennie. So when we talk about rate relief, we're talking about hardship issues. So it's not actually looking at rate concessions like the pensioner rebate, the $150 we offer pensioners. That is different to the situation that we're talking about now, which is short-term hardship in regard to small businesses being able to basically afford payment of their rates. We've just had one round of rates, the quarterly instalments, and all have paid up. I'm not aware of any arrears. May I just add, it may be another question, I'll just put this into that, Mayor Rennie, is that there's also the issue of interest, which has been referred to. Currently, off the top of my head, that's around 8%. We do not offer not charging that everyone is charged the penalty interest rate, which would also be a consideration as well.
Ms Wilkinson has something to add. Yep.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, thank you for the question. So rate relief can take multiple forms, and there are a couple of methods. So one is through pre-existing arrangements that are provided for through policy. So at Darebin, what we have is a situation where people can defer payment of their rates if they're experiencing hardship. The policy allows for that in a domestic situation, not in a commercial situation. Council can also separately, which I think is the intent of Councillor Greco's original motion, Council could potentially consider whether they wanted to waive entirely or in part, or waive interest of particular rates for particular circumstances. That's an option that is available. Obviously, there are things to take into account. So those are things that can occur: precedent, cost, the cumulative impact of that cost over a number of years as well. Council can choose to, as has just been discussed, Council can choose to revisit their rates policy to extend the opportunity to other ratepayers across the city. That's a process that would necessarily take some time, as all policy development does. And in the event that Council was to resolve to call for a report that sought to explore options about rates, we could discuss all of those and the implications further.
Thank you, councillors. Are there any further questions? Councillor Lawrence?
Just one question regarding if I think I'm at a briefing session, the way the ideas are bouncing around. If officers were to prepare a report about what options, obviously rate relief in the context of a failing business is just money they don't have to pay now, because they're just in a survival mode. But wouldn't that report answer in a more detailed way a lot of the questions that have just been asked now?
Ms Bishop?
Through you, Mayor Rooney, yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions? No. So we'll return to debate on the amendment. We've heard from the mover, the seconder, and Councillor Greco. Any further speakers to the amendment? No. So I'll put the amendment to... Sorry, no, I've marked you down because you had a question, so apologies, Councillor Greco. Please speak now.
Thank you for that. Look, I'm glad we went through this question-answer process, and I would have liked to have seen that sort of information in the report, because I know for a fact that the traders, the first thing that they always asked was, what can the council do in relation to rates? That's not mentioned in this report, but I'm glad that we've gone through this question and answer situation. The other point that I would make is that from that question and answer situation, it leaves a lot of areas still unclear about what is the potential that council, what role council can play here. And I take the point that Councillor Newton was made. Yes, this is a state government job that they're doing, but yes, also that the traders have been appealing to the state government, but it's been falling on deaf ears, and they're appealing now to council. We often get residents or other groups appealing to council about matters which are, could be slightly beyond the council's reach, but they still make appeals to us because they are here on our turf, and particularly our traders are here and doing business on our turf. So I think we have a responsibility to them. And I pick up on the point that Councillor Lawrence made, is that, it may be at the end of this process that there aren't very many options for us, but let's make sure that from our standpoint, that we've upturned every stone that we possibly can to see what rate relief we can provide for councillors. And I'm glad that Councillor Messina talked about what's the definition of rate relief, because I fully understand that rates is not something that you switch on meeting after meeting. You can't do that. Rates is a very... let's have this report come back to us so that we can make a much more informed decision and show to our community what council can do to assist them.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there further speakers to the amendment? Councillor Messina.
I think it's very clear that council should receive a report discuss the options and highlight some of the conversation that Councillor McCarthy geared it to. However, I think it applies to the whole of the municipality, not just the reservoir traders. So I would like to pose and perhaps ask that through you, Mayor Rennie, that we do receive a report in terms of what rate relief means to a trader, and if that's possible, and perhaps discuss that at a briefing.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Are there any further speakers? Okay, we'll now vote on the amendment. This is to the amendment. No, you can't amend an amendment. So we're now voting on the amendment. All those in favour of the amendment? And against? That amendment is carried. Councillor Messina, do you have an amendment?
Well, I guess...
Something we can discuss at a briefing.
Yeah, we can discuss it.
Thank you. Okay, so councillors, that is now the motion in front of us. We've heard from the mover and the seconder. We haven't heard from the seconder. Apologies, thank you. So we've heard from Councillor Newton. Councillor Lawrence.
Mayor Rennie, I'm speaking now to the substance of the motion correct? Yeah. Look, I'm very happy to support this motion now because, you know, politics, unfortunately, with 3 levels of government and now body corporates thrown in, we've got 4 levels of government, and the blame shifting occurs and occurs and occurs. The fact is, some of us spent, 10 years longer lobbying for this level crossing. It didn't come out of the blue, didn't come out of a thought bubble. It's been 10 long years. It had been lobbied early in Preston, a long time ago. So this has occurred with our desire, and then this unintended consequences come with both a recession coming in and the longer than maybe any of us anticipated disruption on this. So it's a matter of good faith that to our community that we do seek state support. It's for them, for the traders, and it's a matter of good faith that we also look at what flexibilities we do have and be honest with our community about what we can and can't do. But we do need to get a report and look at it. And look, this can happen again. This has happened before with the floods in Fairfield, and we devoted a lot of resources, of course, there in different ways. So these things do happen. This one is a government-made disaster. Others are natural disasters, but it will be informative for us, and it will also be informative for us, I think, for some of those other situations across the city that Councillor Messina has highlighted.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Any further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Mayor, I have a further amendment that I'd like to put. Yeah, I was just in the process of completing it. It reads like this, but there may be needs, because I'll just quickly, that council provides a fund of $350,000, which represents approximately half of the unspent $750,000 for traders, to be spent on activities for the reservoir, for the reservoir traders. And also what I would like to add on to that, and that money be spent in consultation with the traders of reservoir.
Thank you for that amendment, Councillor Greco. There was a lot there, so you'll probably need to get it in writing and hand it over. I think probably the mover and seconder have heard enough to know whether they would accept it.
No.
No. So it hasn't been accepted. It will need to be debated. Is there a seconder?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. We obviously need to get Councillor Greco to pass on the words, but we'll just take a second while he does that.
I have a question. Can I ask them while we're doing this?
Yes.
There was reference to $700,000. Where is that in the report, I guess is my first question. Oh, here it is, $750,000. Just to, the question is that $750,000 just for reservoir, or is that supposed to be supporting both level crossing removals at Reservoir and Bell Street?
It is for both, but I will get Ms Olivier to clarify.
So through you, Mayor Rennie, yes, it's to support the entire, all the level crossing efforts, so Preston and Reservoir. There is 100,000 of that that's specifically for basically activities in the Preston High Street area to basically support the local traders as that we get closer to disruption.
Okay. Thank you, Ms Olivier. Councillor Greco, have you got the words to pass over? I would just like to, Councillor Greco, if I could also correct an inaccuracy in what you're proposing, which is that you said provide a fund of $350,000, which represents approximately half of the unspent money. That actually represents approximately half of the budget, not the unspent money.
Because Mayor, I wasn't clear. It was not clear to me. What I understood was that we've spent between a third and a half of the money.
Yes.
So I would assume, being an accountant, unfortunately it's infected by brain, that I think in numbers. So I'm trying to get a number so that then I can actually make a number that reflects what half of the unspent money amount is, yes.
Okay, thank you. So we'll get Ms Wilkinson to clear that up so that your amendment is accurate in terms of what it's talking about.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. So council in its budget this year allocated $750,000 towards level crossing work. As Ms Olivier said, the bulk of that effort is intended to be directed towards reservoir, but also to support design work and consultation work in the lead up to the removal of the 4 level crossings around Bell and Preston. At this point, so half of the unspent money would be around $170,000. So if we've spent up to half to this point, so $370,000, so it's half of 370 would be half of the unspent monies.
185.
Yeah.
I put 200. Thanks for that. Yeah.
No, so Councillor Greco, if you can hand that over, I'll actually, while they're typing it up, I'll get you to speak to it. So it's been seconded by Councillor Lawrence.
Yeah, look, Mayor, look, I would prefer for the motion to go up first so that people are clear what I have to say. Otherwise, we're just dismissing the whole issue in that way, and I don't think it really lends to the debate. Yeah?
Okay, thank you. We'll take the time and we'll wait for them to get it up then. So Councillor Greco, I think we're getting pretty close. If you could look up on the screen. We just need one more zero on that. Thank you, Councillor Greco.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Look, and I apologise for taking all this time in getting this much, but it came out from the discussions that we've just had. Look, the residents have been telling me, the traders have been telling me that the activities that the council has been doing up to now are really not cutting through sufficiently enough. I mean, I've got an email here saying from one of the trader saying that giving away coffee cups or candy lollies during the Halloween did not generate extra business. So, giving lollies and things like that are just not the, with all the goodwill that's behind them, it's just not having the impact that traders want to have. The question why I asked how much of that money is spent, because the traders asked me, how is it that the council is spending $750,000 on these activities, but we're not feeling any support, or it's not actually aiding us as a business. So what I'm suggesting through this amendment is that we take some of that money, and I recognise that that money is also used for other rail crossings, and this motion could also be an example for them, is that we take some of that money, we put it in a fund, in a pool, and that we talk directly with the traders and ask them how best to spend that money in order to have the maximum impact for their own businesses in that area. And that's something that we need to do, because up until now, the traders feel that they're not being listened to, both by the state government, and also, unfortunately, they're not being adequately listened to by council. So let's get that money, let's put it in a fund, let's get the traders, sit them around the table and say, guys, what would you do with this money? The other point that I would add is that, and again, is an email that I got this afternoon, that they estimate there are about 25 shops in that area, right, that are hurting really badly. Not all shops are hurting, because some shops are actually, their business has increased. But 25 shops are really, really hurting. Like I mentioned before, back on rent and creating a lot of stress for the shopkeepers. So if we proceeded down this path, one, that it makes it much more transparent in terms of us trying to assist the traders. One, that it actually enables the traders to have some direct input on how that money is to be spent. It's not extra money, it's the existing money, but it's almost like a direct participatory budgeting approach, where you say to the community, here's the money, you tell us, not we tell you, you tell us how we spend it, and we'll go off and actually do that based on the advice, the considered advice that we get from you, but in a direct line type of way.
10 seconds.
So I think that we should proceed down this path, and so it helps to build integrity in what we're trying to do in relation to assisting the traders. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, I'll try and be brief and not use up my minutes, but look, I won't finesse this anymore. Fundamentally, what we're talking about is injecting a marketing budget to re-kickstart this 2 strips that have been badly dented. People take a while to readjust their habits once they've changed for 3 months. There's obviously more details. We need to have our economic development people working with this money and have a more structured approach. But we need a reservoirs reborn or reservoirs back in business type approach, because this is about restarting the destination shopping there, and it's those shops in the middle that require passing trade that haven't got it. Obviously, the coffee shop, Oak Hill, near all the workers, has done very well from the actual LRA workers, but those relying on passing trade are missing that passing trade because it's gone over to Summerhill. So we need a localised destination kickstart. Give you an idea, any business needs at least 4% spent on marketing. If you've driven away a lot of your trade, you're going to need to do that. And a McDonald's Happy Meal costs 10% in promotion just for every one of those meals.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there any further speakers to this amendment? There being none, I'll put the amendment to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That amendment is lost. That brings us back to the motion. Are there further speakers on the motion?
Can we see where the motion is now?
Sorry, we'll just take 6 off, and that's our motion. So we might make the 0.5, if we could make that black, because that's now... Okay, so we've had the mover, the seconder deferred. We've heard from Councillor Lawrence. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Lawrence, you've spoken.
I have an amendment.
Yes, what's the amendment?
After the word rate relief, the words "and a marketing kickstart program."
Rate relief and a marketing kickstart program. So I'll go to the mover and the seconder. So Councillor Newton and Councillor McCarthy. Is that acceptable? You're the mover of this motion. Councillor Lawrence has proposed an amendment, which is the addition of the words "in red." Is that acceptable, Councillor McCarthy?
Fine.
That's fine. Councillor Newton?
Sure, yes.
Councillor Lawrence, that's been accepted by the mover and the seconder, so that is now the motion. Are there any further speakers? Okay, I'll return to Councillor McCarthy if you want to exercise your speaking rights now.
No, that's fine.
Okay, then I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. Thank you.
Mayor Rennie, before we go to the next item, can I please move a procedural motion to hear item 10.10 next, as there's members in the gallery be waiting more than 3 hours to hear it?
Well, a procedural motion has been moved, so I'll have to deal with that, noting that there is someone also waiting for item 8.5. Unless you'd like to change your motion to hear it after 8.5.
I'd be willing to have 8.5 followed by 10.10 followed by returning to 8.6 and onwards.
We have a procedural motion to move 10.10 to the point between 8.5 and 8.6. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Newton. All those in favour? That is carried. So for members of the gallery, we are going to go now to item 8.5. After item 8.5, we will hear item 10.10 and then we will return to item 8.6. So 8.5, we have a submission from Serena O'Malley. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to make 2 points. The first is in relation to 3 on the motion. Would it be possible to make a minor amendment to say something to the effect of subject to reasonable extension where warranted? In the case of the committee that I'm on, we lost a year through no fault of our own in delays, and we haven't finished our work. And everyone knows the work that we're doing on the Ruthven Parkland Committee. So I hope that somebody can make some kind of amendment to that effect. Otherwise, the way that the motion is written at the moment, it picks up dozens and dozens of groups in Appendix C and in some cases terminates them, in our case, now. And just a comment on something that's missing from the report, and I don't believe it could be corrected right now, but I just wanted to mention that I was hoping that there'd be some more practical recommendations in this along just basic procedural issues such as guidelines around terms of reference, turnaround of minutes, issues about how people are accepted onto committees and so on. So how meeting dates are scheduled in advance. These are some of the practical issues that we've faced in our group where, you know, meetings have come on a very ad hoc basis. And as it says, actually, I think I was quoted in there, the person who's facilitating the meeting has also been required to produce the minutes for the meeting. So I do think that having some more of a practical focus on these committees in the future would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for that submission. Councillors, I'll now ask if anyone's got a motion. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I've got a motion that I did circulate at 5:32, so it's with the officer's recommendation, it's with an additional item 8.
Okay, so we'll seek to put that up and then we'll find out if there's a seconder.
That's it.
Thank you for confirming that, Councillor Newton. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor McCarthy, thank you. Councillor Newton.
So this is actually a really exciting motion and report that we're putting out. So all councillors and a lot of the staff spend a lot of time consulting with the community. So this has some quite significant changes about how we do that, and we spent a lot of time thinking about what the best way forward is. So, for example, with the Darebin Community News, we want to make that really accessible to everyone online as well as in different languages. So we're going to move to 4 printed publications per year, but also really up the way that we do things online. In terms of the community engagement strategy and framework, what we're looking at is making it so as many members of the community as possible can have input. We really want input from diverse members of the community. And with the last point, I'm on the Ruthven CRG, and we've been doing a lot of work on that, and there is a couple of key pieces of work, including the draft planting plan and sharing the community vision of the master plan with the Wurundjeri about the renaming process of the park that I know that the reference group would really like to continue to work on. So I hope that everyone can support this proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor McCarthy.
I'll just reserve my right for the moment.
Thank you. Are there further speakers?
Yes, Mayor Rennie. Look, I've had a look at this report, and I know that we had some briefing on it. I would just, and I'll be speaking against the motion, whilst I support the point number 8, and why I'm speaking against the motion because, and I want to flag that I'll have another motion where we basically keep the advisory committees as they are. And the reason I'm saying that is that when I look at the advisory committees, I think that they've provided a lot of valuable work over the years. Ever since that I've been on council, the advisory committees have been a way for the community with expertise or with a passion or with an interest to actually have some input directly into the council. Not only to have an input into the councillors that sit on those committees, but also to have an input and develop a relationship with officers that are making decisions on a day-by-day basis, operational decisions, and to have an impact on them. And also it's enabled the council to have many windows open to the community and to truly make it like a participatory democracy, if you like, that you just don't have a say just when there's elections or when you're called to have a say because of a specific consultation process, but where you're actually building on the expertise of the community and for the community to have an input. I also acknowledge that some of the committees obviously they have their ups and downs, and I think we did a good move is to make many of the meetings on a quarterly basis. So, and I believe that whilst the committee members, and I take the point that has come from the audience, is that whilst I believe that some of the work of the committee can be improved, that goes without a doubt. But I think we should keep the committees as they are and let them continue to do the work that they've been doing.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there further speakers? Councillor Lyons.
Yeah, Mayor Rennie, look, I think the content of point 8 is very important, and it was a general principle raised by officers about the need for committees to have specific tasks and timelines. And so that's a good principle decision that we had discussed in the briefings, and it's a noble aim. But what we've seen tonight with a last-minute amendment is the practicality that the members of those committees are best placed to suggest some specific tasks that still need to be done. Now, when I'm looking at the merit of that amendment, it occurs to me that we need to supply procedural fairness to all those committees who may identify specific tasks that they still need to do. Obviously, I can't go through them all now, but looking at it through the filter of that point 8, I'd say there's a number of committees that could actually identify specific tasks that they continue to do. And while that's doesn't preclude the council moving this direction, it certainly gives me pause to think that we're moving too fast and there hasn't been enough specific consultation, given that we're at the last hour getting this very meaningful contribution from just one community group.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there further speakers? There being none, I will turn to Councillor McCarthy to see if you'd like to exercise your right to speak.
Thank you. It's been an interesting sort of debate here in relation to this item. I just wanted to more generally refer to the work that our communities do and the value that they bring, and having been in the role of having kicked off a few of the committees, it's not on, having been in the role of having commenced or initiated some of the committees that we're referring to this evening, particularly those in relation to master plans and key policy areas. I think we also need to recognise that sometimes committees themselves find that the work that they were doing has been superseded in other places, and in those cases where those have been identified, I respect the views of people who say that in fact other parts of council, other committees within council have taken up that work, and they're happy for that work to now transition to another model. In relation to, for instance, the Arts Ambassadors, the type of expertise that we require and engage with is actually quite broad, and having been involved in that, I support the recommendation because the recommendation actually responds to the needs of those committee members in terms of how we proceed forward. In relation to the broader work of our community engagement and communications, it is very clear that the ability for our community to be up to date with what is happening within council, not just the sort of the theatrics and the decisions of this chamber, but in fact actually the range of programs that are available to people and should be more widely available, has shifted. And the print-based medium is not the primary source of information for most people. However, it is still an essential component of that. So I'm pleased that we're continuing to have a printed DCN 4 times a year as per the proposal, with the online model being more regular. We know that that communication is important, and I think that this proposal as a whole strikes that balance in terms of consultation, communication and deliberation.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Newton, would you like to exercise your right of reply?
No, I'll reserve it, thanks.
Well, thank you. That's the end of the debate, so I'll go straight to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That motion is carried. As per the procedural motion, yes?
Mayor Rennie, can I have my vote recorded?
Certainly, and Councillor Greco I see, so we will record that Councillor Greco and Councillor Lawrence voted in opposition. As per the procedural motion that we passed before item 8.5, we will now move to item 10.10 on the agenda, which relates to the affirmation of the Darlington Statement. I'll take that as moved by Councillor Amir and seconded by Councillor Newton. Councillor Amir.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So this is a motion for Darebin to affirm the Darlington Statement for the human rights of intersex people in Australia and New Zealand. And if we were to do this tonight, we would be the first council to do so. I've been speaking with Intersex Human Rights Australia, and they're very excited about this motion here tonight. And I also wanted to acknowledge people in the gallery. Paul, who's an intersex person living in Darebin, has been a strong advocate and educator, along with members of Darebin's Sex, Sexuality and Gender Diversity Advisory Committee. Thank you for waiting so long. Around 1 to 2% of people are intersex. So that means with around 160,000 people in Darebin, that's maybe 2,000 intersex people, though, of course, some may or may not identify as intersex themselves. And there's lots of different intersex variations, many variations in sex chromosomes, anatomy or hormones, but the Darlington Statement focuses on what intersex people have in common. It was created by intersex people and intersex organisations from around Australia and New Zealand, and it has a range of things that the community that has came together to write the statement was asking for. So that includes bodily autonomy, equality and the prohibition of non-consensual medical intervention, including on intersex babies and children, which still remains common, horrifyingly, protection from discrimination, administrative systems that account for the reality of diverse sex and gender, relevant and inclusive health and community services, peer support programs, education programs, and there's a lot more in there. Anyone who hasn't read the statement, I highly recommend that you do so. So some of what's included in the Darlington Statement is not directly within control of Council's work, but a lot of it is. There's certainly a lot we can do in making sure that all of our processes, all of our forms, all of our services, all of our spaces are inclusive for intersex people. So you also have on here, have the intersex flag flying from the 26th of October to the 8th of November. So the flag is flying right now. This isn't something new, but it's part of our ongoing commitment. And one of my concerns in putting this forward was that I thought maybe we'd need to do more before we can be really confident in saying Darebin is a place that is inclusive for intersex people. But in talking with Intersex Human Rights Australia, they said very strongly that this can be the next step forward in affirming our commitment to the human rights of intersex people. And I hope that by doing this, that we inspire other councils to follow the lead. In hearing the stories of intersex people and reading, we know the challenge, both logistically and emotionally, of the discrimination that's faced, and I hope that we can make a contribution to reducing that, to making life a bit easier, and also being strong allies to intersex people.
Thank you, that's time.
From this point on. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So I think Councillor Amir said it really well, so I'll be brief. But something that I really liked about when we first had a discussion about this at our Sexuality, Sex and Gender Diversity Committee meeting recently was that what we heard from our committee was nothing about us without us, which is the same for the Disability Advisory Committee. And I think going by our last item, it really shows the value of having the right people around the table. So it's really wonderful that we found a member, an intersex person from the Darebin community to be here tonight. And I really agree with Councillor Amir that I really hope that this is something that kickstarts something that other councils in Australia can follow. As a feminist, I think it's incredibly important that all genders are equal and recognised. All intersex people, all LGBTIQ plus people, because it's going to lead to a better world. So I'm very happy to support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Are there further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I fully support this motion, and I think it's important that we make this declaration, given that this city has had a strong tradition in acknowledging and respecting diversity of all forms in our city. I was going to put this in a motion, but I'll just say it maybe for officers that I think that in order to give this motion extra weight, I think that we should receive a report, and maybe through a briefing, about how this declaration, if we are to vote in favour of this declaration, how it may impact, as Councillor Amir said, on other aspects of council policies, because it's because if we make this declaration, I don't want it to be that we make this declaration and then we have inconsistencies in relation to our other documents in the council. So I think what we should do is just do a quick survey or quick audit of other documents, and to make sure that they are consistent with this declaration. Otherwise, it just, we're going that step further in relation to that. So, that's just my point. Thank you.
Councillor Greco, are there any further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion was passed unanimously, and we'll note that that was unanimous. Thank you to members of the gallery who waited for that one in particular. We'll now move to item 8.7 and continue with the 8.6, apologies, and continue with the agenda as listed.
Happy to move that.
That's moved by Councillor McCarthy, seconded by Councillor Lasserf. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll keep it brief. It's very exciting to have the first batch of our commercial version of the Darebin Solar Savers program. This is a pilot. and a limited number of properties because we really want to make sure we get it right. But the uptake as part of this pilot has been really impressive. Impressive for a few reasons. Obviously, the pure amount of kilowatts that we'll be creating, in this case 118 kilowatts of solar capacity in Darebin, which does go towards our overall target of doubling solar generation in Darebin over 4 years. But also critically is actually the organisations and the businesses that are actually part of this pilot, which I think is very reflective of Darebin in terms of both its commercial and community activity. And in this case, we have three properties, or three business sites, three businesses as such, and organisations and entities involved, in this case being Elk, which is obviously one of our premier retailers, obviously has an extraordinary reputation, not just in Darebin but beyond, and has been a critical partner with Darebin in terms of our business award activities, in terms of our range of council initiatives. Of course, also our Buddhist temple here, the Linsong Temple, and of course also the Islamic Museum of Australia. So we have not only being able to engage in the commercial sector in this case, but also the cultural sector. And the uptake, as you'll see, councillors, from the report, is very clearly a strong commitment to the program, but a real chance to test what happens when we look at different types of buildings in the range of sites that have been identified in the report. We obviously have a high concentration in Reservoir, which is fantastic. We have a really great opportunity there, and of course also in Thornbury with the Islamic Museum as well. So I commend the work of the officers in getting us to this stage. This is the first commercial rollout of solar savers, obviously in Darebin, and the first time that a rates-based solar scheme has been made available in Darebin for our commercial properties. And it is really a sign of things to come in terms of the work that we can do with our commercial sector, who we know are hungry to not only engage in the solar in renewable energy production, but also understand and exploit and support those savings and enable other businesses to see the value of that too. So the start of good things to come.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lasuf.
Councillor McCarthy covered it well. I just wanted to make 2 points though. In going out to non-residential properties in this, it is a much more, I guess, efficient way to get more solar on the roofs. There are 5 properties covered with 118 kilowatts, which is great, and that 3 businesses. If you compare that to, I guess, the last solar savers for residents, which is really important to do as well, we had to deal with 146 different households to get 700 plus kilowatt hours. So in terms of impact per site, it's really, really important that we expand out to businesses. The second point I wanted to make is for businesses, energy price volatility is, I guess, something that is front of mind to them and obviously has an impact on their expenditure. And so being able to help them to install solar panels on their roof actually makes really good business sense for them. And so there's a win-win there for economic development, but also our fight against the climate emergency.
Thank you, Councillor Lasuf. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, look, this is a really exciting area to go into. As has been noted, this is a non-residential batch, and we've mentioned one cultural institution and one place of worship, which is basically set up in an old school building. And 1960s school buildings were notoriously badly insulated, and so that'll be a great take-up. But around this whole area, there's a lot of really they're community-based organisations. And so I don't just see this as a commercial application of Solar Saver, but actually this is a different aspect of the community. And I think they are moving in, community groups are moving into old industrial areas, and those groups can really benefit from this program as it goes forward because they have huge roof spans in those old industrial places.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to item 8.7.
Have that noted unanimously, was it?
We will note that 8.6 was unanimous. Before we begin 8.7, I'll just once again remind councillors that we did have a submission by Adam on this item half an hour ago or so. So 8.7, is there a mover?
Happy to move it.
Moved by Councillor McCarthy, seconded by Councillor Newton. Councillor McCarthy.
In the interest of time, I'll try to make this brief. And obviously big thanks to Adam, who joined us earlier, and hopefully Adam gets a chance to catch up on the debate that it would have been great to witness. In relation to this item, obviously we're not making a decision in relation to this. The decision is obviously the one of a state government level rather than a council level, but we do need to note it formally, given that we made a submission and the final recommendation of the VEC affects this council in terms of its future electoral structures. And I'm pleased to say that the recommended option which council supported is also the one that was endorsed by the VEC, and which, depending of course on the consideration of the minister and the government more generally, should be the one that we proceed with in the future, which is of course the maintenance of three-member wards, which delivers the sort of depth and breadth of representation across this city that I think has delivered energetic and diverse councils, both in terms of their politics, their geographic spread, and of course also communities of interest. And that's probably the critical thing that came through, is that in the range of submissions that were presented, from Adams that we heard from this evening through to other members of the community, and of course those organisations that take a keen interest in the proportional representation element of elections, is that the system that we have at the moment is far more successful in delivering that breadth and depth of ideas than I would say the previous systems, and the previous systems being of course the single member wards. So whilst it remains to be seen what moves the minister will make in relation to proposals to move councils like Darebin to single member wards, any move in that direction flies in the face of the evidence-based approach that the VEC has put forward, endorsed, and of course was endorsed pretty much unanimously by the submitters. So I just want to thank again all the submitters that were involved in this, all the community members who were also engaged in this, whether or not they made submissions. People read the reports, they considered the recommendations, and I think our community in general is well served by VEC's proposal, and I hope it meets the support of the minister and the government more generally.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. We'll now move to the seconder, Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I don't want to take up too much time either, but I did just want to note that I think it's really good that in the report it talks about how further down the track, once this is hopefully approved, we will be able to put something forward about changing the names of the wards to names in the local language. I think that's a really positive thing and something that came through in lots of the submissions that I read. And I think it would very much reflect the council and the community that we are. In terms of the report itself and the VEC recommendations, I'm very supportive of the recommendations. I think what was great, reading the community submissions, also being a part of the submission process myself, was that our community who submitted really reflected back that for them, having 3 multi-member wards really works for them. So we've had that for the last 12 years, I believe, and it's led to 2 of the councillors that we've got here today. And I think going through the process, seeing that our community has endorsed what we have, it reflects the right thing for our community, I think is wonderful. And I am very much hoping that we will see 3x3 multi-member wards next year.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Are there any further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. That brings us to 8.8, election period policy.
Happy to move that, Mayor.
Moved by Councillor McCarthy, seconded by Councillor Messina. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. Council is of course required and expected to give consideration to the policy that it puts in place to deal with the election period. The period, of course, taking into account the various timeframes that occur. That is obviously the timeframe for nominations, but also earlier timeframes as well. And some councils have very loose policies in this space, and some have far more restrictive. And I think Darebin's is generally pretty much in the middle, in the sense that it seeks not to inhibit the decision-making processes of the council or the functionality of the council, but certainly seeks to protect the integrity of the council and ensure that councillors, incumbent councillors, do not and are not in a position to either advantage themselves or others during that pre-election period. And this is a really important thing because the decisions that councils make during an election period can actually have an impact on public sentiment. So the last thing we want to do is have a policy that enables any abuse of that. The policy that we have before us, councillors, as you would be aware, picks up on many of the good things in the previous policy, tightens some things as well, and certainly makes the point that that in the period when elections are commenced and underway, this council is largely in an operational space, not making major funding decisions, not making decisions that have generally a material impact or an unusual impact on the community, and certainly not engaged in policy changes as would be concerned during the rest of the course of the council term. So I endorse the work that's been done. I thank the officers for bringing this to us in a timely fashion, and I look forward to council adopting its election period policy in due course.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Messina.
I just want to echo the words put through by Councillor McCarthy. I think what we need is a policy so we know what to do so we don't break the law. So we need something to follow, something to set an example by, and this is clear, it's precise. We know what we have to undertake, and we know what we can't do. So just happy to endorse it. And thank you for the officers who spent much time putting this together so that I would have some clarity as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Are there further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried.
Have that noted as
Mayor, can I
carried
just raise a
unanimously.
procedural motion? I just noticed there's one person
Sorry,
left in
I've
the...
just, Councillor McCarthy hasn't actually stopped the last one he just asked. I'll get to that, but Councillor McCarthy
Just asking if we
asked
can have
that
that
it be
noted
noted
as unanimous.
as unanimous.
If I
So
could
we'll
raise
do
a
that.
procedural, we've just got one person in the audience that I think is waiting for one of the notices of motion, number 10.6. So I move a procedural motion that we hear that, and then we can go back to our normal agenda order.
Okay, we'll deal with this one first and then I'll get one to extend the time. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Messina?
Do we need to extend our time for this evening?
We'll deal with this one and then we'll get to that one. So we've got a procedural motion, which is that we take item 10.6 and do it now before turning to the agenda. All those in favour? And against? That motion is carried. So, Councillor Messina, you have a procedural motion in relation to extending the
Looking
time?
forward, I'm looking at the agenda and I'm hoping we can, we need to extend the time for about 30 minutes. Not hoping to, but I think we'll need to
So
extend
I'll take
it.
that as motion. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor McCarthy, all those in favour? Okay, so we've extended the meeting till 10:30 and we've also moved the item 10.6 forward. So we will now move to item 10.6. Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Look...
Just before, we need a seconder, so don't start speaking.
Yeah, I need a seconder.
Is there a seconder for this motion? Councillor Lawrence. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Rennie. Look, I'm just going to make four very short points because I think we've discussed this item or this issue for some time now. Firstly, I'd like to say that we've heard from the Darebin Ethnic Communities Council. We've heard from them on a number of occasions now, even at today's meeting, that they found that that point 2A of the resolution that we passed at the last meeting was objectionable, offensive and patronising. And I strongly believe that we need to make an apology in relation to that particular part of the motion. And we've heard some of the reasons why, and directly from the Darebin Ethnic Community members. I also acknowledge that, and I don't think there's any dispute here, that part of the motion or the advice that was received in relation to that part of the motion was in any way, there's any malice behind it or any other intent behind it. And I acknowledge that there was, there's no bad intent, if you like, about that. But also acknowledge that when we're dealing with minority groups, sometimes when we say things, we may not think that they are offensive, but the organisation or the group or the individual that's hearing those comments feels great offence. And we often are in those situations. And so it's not a question of whether the organisation thinks that there was nothing offensive about that. We have to understand that the organisation receiving that sort of messaging feels offence. And so then the question becomes, okay, how do we correct that? How do we make sure that, you know, we can sort of move forward, and how can we make sure that, you know, we can start to build relationships again? And I really think, given that it's a call from Darebin Ethnic Communities Council, in relation to that particular point, is that, you know, we offer an apology as a way of putting this behind us and as a way of actually moving forward and continuing on that relationship that we've had, that Darebin Ethnic Communities Council has had with the council for the last 25 years. I think that if we don't offer an apology, I think that it could leave like a sour note between the council and DEC. So I just appeal to councillors
That's time, thank you.
Let's offer this apology so that we can put it behind us and move forward.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Lawrence.
Mayor Rennie, look, I think that our meeting procedure and code of conduct in terms of respect to people is fairly clear. I was respectful treatment of the community, respectful treatment of each other. I was looking at a ruling you made earlier tonight in regards to some language in a resident, emotive and being emotive and unhelpful, and I believe that resident changed their language. So these things are give and take, and I think probably the best example we can give in terms of respectful treatment to our community is to offer an apology and understand that the context and, you know, the emotions on the other side we might not fully understand, and the context of these words reinforces experiences of marginalisation, experiences of invisibility, experiences people who have accents or look different have their skills and experience discounted too often in this country. So, and that's of course happens in this community as well, although I think we pride ourselves on being tolerant and welcoming and supportive. It still happens. So I think we need to walk a mile in DEC's shoes here and be the bigger party in this.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there any further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour and against? That motion is lost. We'll now return to item 8.9 on the agenda.
Happy to move that, Mayor.
Thank you. That's moved by Councillor McCarthy and seconded by Councillor Amir. Sorry, it's just made it a bit hard if you're turning the pages. Okay, apologies. So we're on item 8.9, council meeting dates, and it's on page 408. It's been moved by Councillor McCarthy and seconded by Councillor Amir. So, Councillor McCarthy.
Thanks, Mayor. Just quickly, this item is really to set the dates for council and planning committee meetings for the next 12 months, and obviously sets those out in a time frame that is similar to the current schedule, and obviously also sets the time frames for hearing of submissions committees that, sorry, I should say identifies that timeframes for hearing of submissions committees and Bundoora Homestead are dealt with by other processes, but are of course statutory meetings that we need to acknowledge in this motion. So I'll end it there, and hopefully councillors can move through this quickly.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Amir. Any further speakers? No? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to item 8.10, contract award. If you're going to move it, please let us know what you're moving. So is there a mover for this item?
Happy to move it, Mayor. I'm just going to read out the...
Thank you. That's moved by Councillor McCarthy.
which should be appearing on screen. Thank you.
Councillor McCarthy, if you can confirm that's what you intended.
Yes, it
And
is.
seconded by Councillor Le Cerf.
Thank you.
Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. Just conscious of time, so I'm going to make this really brief. This is obviously to award the contract for the place-based upgrades at both Bundoora Park and Ellie Cochin Reserve. Council, as per usual, goes through a competitive process. Obviously, in relation to both of these upgrades, we have an obligation that we're doing everything, not only in terms of meeting all the standards and delivering those sorts of inclusive and engaging play spaces that we are now the new standards for Darebin under our play-space strategy, but also that we're responsive to both locations in their particular ways. So I won't go through the merits of the designs and those sorts of things. This is really about the tender and the process that council has gone through. But I would make the point that, like pretty much every tender process, we deal with this in the open chamber because we think it is really important for people to understand the investment that council makes and the processes that sit behind, which are outlined obviously in the open council report. So I'll end it there.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Le Cerf. Nothing to add. Are there any further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. So that brings us to item 8.11, 2019-20 Capital Works Program Adjustment. Is there a mover? Councillor Newton, thank you. A seconder? Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I'll keep this brief. I think this is a really good move for us. What this means is that we can really give the hockey pitch the investment that it deserves. So what we're going to do is defer the start of the construction of the hockey pitch until the summer of 2021, and we're going to do that by kind of shifting around how we do the footpath renewal works. So I'm really, I think the work is really good to get this outcome, and I'm very pleased to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor McCarthy.
Just wish to note that it's been good to see council officers work with the Latrobe Uni Hockey Club and of course finding a mutually agreeable way forward in relation to the timeframes, and so that consultation is great to see.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there further speakers? Councillor Lyons.
Question, Mayor Rennie?
Yes?
Just we're voting for a reduction of $1 million in the draft footpath plan for 2021. Do we have the streets that are being reduced? A list?
I'll pass that to Mr Hewitt.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. We already have the list of footpaths that we are ready to construct. We've got a contractor on standby. These are footpaths identified through our condition audit and part of our asset management plan, so we are ready to go.
So, Councillor Lawrence, I'm not sure if that answered your question, but effectively the $1 million worth of footpaths are being brought forward a year. It's not that they're not getting done, they're being brought forward, being done a year earlier to spend that million in this year.
You just work back through a priority list.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out what I'm voting on.
Ms Wilkinson might add something.
Yeah, that's right, Councillor Lawrence. So we have a forward program of footpaths. It's one of the areas we do have good data. So the idea is that we overperform in this category this year in order to save money for the project next year.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That is the end of Consideration of reports, consideration of responses to petitions, notices of motion and general business. There are none. So that brings us to the notices of motion, and the first is 10.1. I'll take that as moved by Councillor Williams. Seconded by Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Williams.
There's a slight amendment in reference to the amendment on B and C from 1 kilometres to 400 metres.
Okay, so we'll just from 1 kilometre to 400 metres.
Okay, I was going to say, yeah.
Yep.
I just also have a question, if it's possible, through you, Mayor, about how much is actually allocated per year with treatments to address safety and concerns around schools to other officers?
Thank you. So I will refer that maybe, I don't know whether Ms Olivia or Mr Hewitt would be best placed to answer the question, which was about the budget allocation to address safety around schools per year. Is that right, Councillor Williams?
Correct.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, I actually don't have those figures immediately at hand. It's a reasonably substantial budget, so Council's overall safe travel program budget is in the order of 1.1 or 1.2 million a year. And then the walking program budget is on top of that, and some of the operating programs like Octopus Schools and the cycling program. So overall, there are 3 reasonably large-sized programs of council that all have safety benefits, and to which this analysis that officers have done goes into planning those every year.
Okay. Well, that's great. Great that we actually have these projects like the Octopus school program, especially under the Safe Travels strategy program, which doesn't believe to cover all primary and secondary schools. From memory, with the report that we got from our briefing last week, that it was implied that there was about $1 million, about 500,000 goes towards per school regarding calming traffic in the area. Can you confirm that that is correct?
We'll just pause the clock. Thank you. Ms Livier.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. The $500,000 per school is what we've got a long pipeline of safety improvements that have been identified. So we've gone out and visited most of the schools. We've identified how you would improve safety, and actually the works to be done across the city equate to about 500,000 a school. And given the number of schools across the city, that's $17.5 million to get through all of those identified works. And so then council's programs each year prioritise those, and they do the top priorities out of that list. But you can see from the size of that amount that it will take a number of years to get through all of those.
Okay, great. So if we have $1 million that it's allocated in the budget and it costs the average of 500,000 per school, that equates to only 2 schools per year. That is receiving improvements on raised crossing and splitter islands at intersections. And I know that this will take a long period of time. However, we're talking only 2 schools a year, which may take decades when you're talking at over 17 schools. This is exactly why I'm actually requesting for this information. The maps and the report that would come back to council will outline what areas that have already been treated and where the gaps are. It will also give us a sense of where we're at and if we need to revisit and prioritise. We need to review the primary and secondary schools because incidents have been happening in the area in recent times, which may change which are the ones that we actually prioritise. I want to know where Tyler Street has been prioritised or not, because I've had information from residents that have been very vocal on several incidents that have occurred in Tyler Street and McCall Street, and I'd like to know where Tyler Street is ranked on this report. Also from the report, it may imply that we may need to review the amount of money or whether we need to allocate more money in the budget.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Lawrence.
Nothing to add. Obviously, we'll get the information from all these programs soon.
Thank you.
I'd like to propose an amendment.
Yes, can you read it out? Or
The officers have it.
Okay. Maybe read it so people can start to hear it, unless they can get it up.
There's a few small changes, wording changes. So then it would read that council requests that council officers prepare a report for council which provides an update on work that addresses safety and traffic calming measures around schools in Darebin, and that this report identifies priorities for works near primary and secondary schools that further improve safety and traffic calming measures within a 1 kilometre radius. I'm happy to have 400 metres if that's preferred, by the mover and seconder. Oh, is it now there? Yeah. B, maps the calming measures put in place around and near the schools, and C, identifies how priorities have considered accidents that have occurred near schools. And again, I'm happy to be flexible with the radius.
Okay. So that's now been put up by the officers. Councillor Williams, as the mover, is that acceptable to you? And Councillor Lawrence, is that acceptable to you? Or just
just ask a question. I'm assuming the previous 2018 date was there because our current program would have previous accidents already factored in, or no?
I couldn't comment on why the previous one had accidents that have occurred since 2018. Well, so your amendment doesn't have it.
I'm just seeking some clarification.
Well, I'm not sure, because Councillor Williams drafted the first one. So I guess the question is, we could enter debate if you don't wish to accept it, but Councillor Williams, do you accept the amendment?
It's pretty much the same, but I'm happy to...
You're happy to accept it? So Councillor Lawrence, are you happy to accept it? Thank you. Thank you for that. So that now becomes the motion. Are there further speakers to the motion? Councillor Amir.
I want to thank Councillor Williams for bringing this. It's absolutely pedestrian safety is a really important issue, and especially around schools. As has been mentioned, we've done lots of work in this space with the safe travel strategy and the it's late. The Safe Schools audits, as well as the programs that have been in place. And actually, Darebin's been on the leading edge with some of the data-driven approaches that we've been using. So hearing your debate now, what it sounds like to me is it's about moving from to get that information front and centre so that we can then prioritise that if that's what's important to us as councillors in the next budget. And that's something I would certainly support in the upcoming budget for next year.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there further speakers? Being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously, and we'll note that that was unanimous. At 10.2, Councillor Williams, I'll take that as moved by you. As per this, or were there any word changes?
No, don't have any.
Okay, so that's moved by Councillor Williams as per printed in the agenda. Is there a seconder for that? Hang on, just wait. Is there a seconder for Councillor Williams' motion? Yes. Councillor Lawrence got in there, so we'll get it on the screen. It's also on page 428 of the agenda.
I've brought this to Council's attention due to the government's announcement of the removal of the 4 level crossings on the Mernda line. Located now will be at Bell Street, Kramer Street, Murray Road, Oakover Road and Preston Station. Traders on High Street are anxious and concerned after the devastating financial losses that reservoir traders have faced, which was totally underestimated. Preston Market storeholders are concerned they too are going to have huge losses due to customers not able to find parking either at the market or nearby. Footy and cricket sporting clubs are concerned as they will not be able to obtain parking at the ground for matches or training at the Preston Civic Oval. Due to the closure of the car parking at Reservoir Station, train commuters are illegally parking either at Regent Station and in nearby side streets, which are parked longer than the permitted time frame stipulated. Residents have raised concerns that they will not be able to park in their own street. The people of Darebin that work, live, play and shop in Darebin are anxious. Where will they find car parking, especially after seeing the devastating consequences that has occurred at Reservoir Station? Many say it will be poor planning. In fact, some have actually said that it's been a debacle on council's behalf. I say that these are lessons to be learnt, and these are lessons ensuring that there is better planning and communication for a better outcome. The fact is that Reservoir Station was only the removal of one level crossing. In the near future, we are actually looking at 4 coming up in the next year. We have a year to plan and communicate at all levels to ensure a better outcome during the duration of this construction.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Lawrence.
I'll reserve my right.
Thank you. Are there further speakers?
I have an amendment.
Councillor Messina, yes.
I have circulated that to the officers.
Hang on, that's 10.3. So we'll go back. Councillor Messina has circulated or sent rather an amendment. Councillor Messina, can you just check that that's the amendment you intended?
Yes, can I also add for item number 3? Oh, item number 3 for report for council by March 2020, which
Okay, so
request that council officers prepare a report for council by March 2020, which.
okay, so we're adding a date. Thank you. So we'll go to Councillor Williams and Councillor Lawrence to ask if that amendment is acceptable. So
Could I have some information about when the works are starting?
so there's a question while Councillor Williams is considering that, a question about when works are starting. Ms Olivia, are you able to answer that question?
So through you, Mayor Rennie, the first possible timing for a closure in this area is May 2020, although it could be later, and that's a reasonably minor closure, that first one.
Thank you. Councillor Williams, is the amendment acceptable to you?
I'm not sure how managing a disruption in Preston.
So it's a yes or no. We can debate it if you're not sure, or you could accept it. No, okay. So is there a seconder for Councillor, so seconded by Councillor Lasserf. So Councillor Messina, would you like to speak to your amendment?
I'm conscious of the the notice of motion that was put through by Councillor Williams. I want to commend her for her work. I think what this does is just tighten it a little bit and have it more specific and acknowledge the most important fact is that we have budgeted for this particular item and there has been some work that have been undertaken by officers already. So it is work in progress, and I wanted to highlight that we already have $750,000 in the budget for the Preston and Reservoir removal. And by putting a date for March 2020, we say, look, we are asking the officers that we need a report and we need to action this. And I think reservoir level crossing removal was an example of what needs to be undertaken and for us moving forward. Yes, the traders of the Preston market, yes, traders at the precinct are concerned, and I think this just gives us a little bit more crosses the T's and dots the I's for us moving forward.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Councillor Lassurf, would you like to speak to the amendment? Okay. Are there any further speakers to the amendment? No. No. I'll put the amendment to the vote. All those in favour? And against? Okay, the amendment is carried. So we're back to debate on the motion. We had heard from Councillor Williams. Councillor Lawrence had reserved his right. Are there any further speakers on the motion? No. Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor Reddy. Look, I think this is a very important motion that Councillor Williams has put forward. And why it's important is I just refer back to the reservoir rail crossing situation and with the traders there. I think both council and also the state government has completely underestimated the impact that rail crossings removal of rail crossings have on the commercial sector that surrounds the rail crossing area, and I think that we really need to clearly look at this sort of work and to make sure that we're ahead of the curve, if you like, and that we fully understand what the implications of this will be. If we think of what's going to happen in Preston, it's almost like double the impact that it will have on the reservoir rail crossing. We're looking at 4 rail crossings, probably will take much longer. Also, the impact on the shops, and particularly Preston Market, will be profound. And I don't think that neither the state government nor us, on the evidence that I've seen, have really prepared ourselves for what that impact will be to the traders. And why I say that is that I'm just not making an assumption. I'm saying that because that's what I've heard the traders say. Traders are fairly pragmatic people. They don't organise to go and stop a train like they did because it's hurting. And so I think that the work that this motion envisages is really critical and highly sensitive work that we really need to get our heads around, and it may be that we have to spend more money than what's up there on the screen.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there further speakers? No. Councillor Lawrence, back to you as you reserved your right.
Just a question, I can't move an amendment anyway, I'm the seconder.
No, you can't.
Yeah, so, look, I am... the mind boggles about those 3 roads being disrupted at the same time. It's not pleasant. I haven't seen it. To see traders disrupting a train station, train travel on a Friday. That's happened, I think, twice. It shows a level of desperation, and it shows that we haven't really anticipated things properly. So what I'm concerned about still is I think it's good that we're trying to put some dates into this motion, but I'm just worried if we're considering how to respond just when the thing's starting, maybe we're a couple of months late already, because I'm not sure what we can do, but I just imagine there might be, you know, some things that we have to do. I'm not sure how you cope with it, but it's. I did see Bentley, and they had a range of things in place regarding parking, and they went a long distance away actually from where the works were, because they basically had to shuffle a whole lot of people, different users for different activities, not just the shopkeepers themselves, but there's, as we know, there's other organisations that are in that sector. There's not-for-government people
10
in
seconds.
Mary Street. And obviously the impact on High Street's going to be massive. So I'm just concerned about the date in this now.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Messina?
I have a question through you, Mayor Rennie. Can I, some of this work's already in progress from the information that we've received. That's not going to hinder the report being finalised by March 2020, and will that report then give us obstacles to ensure that it won't be in readiness for September 2020, or sorry, May 2020, when the closure will be commenced?
Okay, thank you. And just to clarify, I thought that was the works might commence in May, not the closure. So I'll just, which is a big difference. We're not talking about closure in May.
Thank you. I just wanted to highlight the
but
difference.
I'll get Ms Olivia to just clarify that.
So the first possible timing for a closure, but a minor one, is May 2020, and it could be later. We don't have full sight of that. I am confident that that timing gives us the lead time to manage disruption.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? No, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to item 10.3. I'm just conscious of the time. I might get someone to move another continuance.
Actually, I was going to move, Mayor, just whether we could actually move to deal with item 14, which is the confidential matter, which councillors received, which I'm not sure if it's listed in the agenda, but we do have a report. Oh, we do have a council report.
On the compulsory acquisition.
And if council doesn't consider it, would council then be considering it? Would it be listed for the subsequent meeting?
Okay, well, I think my first question is do extend the time. So you move that. So move that we extend the time. Seconded by Councillor Williams. All those in favour? And against? That is carried. So we've extended the time till 11. Councillor McCarthy, you'd requested that we pull 14.
I'm just seeking clarification, Mayor, whether item 14 is actually going to be heard this evening. Councillors have a report, but it's not listed in the agenda. Maybe we can get clarification in relation to that.
Okay, I'll ask Mr Mann to...
Through you, Mayor, I've got an agenda here that has on page 448, confidential report, compulsory acquisition of the right-of-way at Dunbarton Street.
Yeah. Last page.
Okay, maybe councillors that are operating off a electronic agenda are not. It's not listed on the electronic agenda. So, given that the time extension has occurred, Mayor, I'll withdraw the need to move to that item, and
Okay.
We may need to.
What version of the agenda was published? Because isn't that the one we need to go by?
Well, through you, Mayor,
Probably do that and continue with the meeting and
Okay,
come back
so
to that
if we
question.
could get, while we're continuing on with 10.3, if we could get officers to just check the exact status of what's gone up online. It is confidential, so it would be minimal anyway. We'll do to item 10.3 and then we'll come back to that question. So, Councillor Lawrence, I'll take 10.3 as moved by you. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Greco. So, Councillor Lawrence, over to you.
Yes, Mayor Rennie. Look, this has been raised by a number of traders and also residents about the process in terms of consultation on the crossing, and obviously the scope of the crossing, which has been mainly to lift the railway line, but hasn't necessarily looked at untangling the 17 conflicting movements that exist on the road network. A number of traders and residents have raised with me, you know, given the limited nature of the road realignment, can council come back and look at the local road network in regards to getting east-west connectivity? So obviously what we're talking about there is that you will still have this weird hook turn when you want the wealthier section to go over to Broadway and there's actually services there, optometrists, dentists, all sorts of things there, and vice versa with people who want to go to the library or go to the lake from the east. So once the dust settles, I think we'll start to see that while Vic Roads has got their way in terms of north-south alignments, that we've sort of missed some opportunities in terms of local traffic, and I'm obviously talking about controlled turns and not creating rat runs. So I'm just seeking some exploration on that.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Greco.
Yeah, Mayor Reddy, look, I support this motion. I was very involved in the reservoir structure plan, I think at the previous council, and a lot of work went into that. And one of the expectations that the community had was about, one is that they put into that report the removal of the crossing, which we're now realising, but also what was behind that was the idea of trying to connect these two separate areas together and to create sort of the one precinct, if you like. And so we have a golden opportunity to do that now, or the real opportunity to do that with the rail crossing being removed. But more work really needs to go to on how we connect those two areas together. Otherwise, we would have removed the crossing, but still have this, if you like, this Berlin Wall still there, not in a physical sense, but in a mental sense, in that the two areas will continue to remain distinctly different. So we need to do this work and ensure that we can advocate to the state government of ways of linking those two areas, given that a lot of that area under the rail crossing is state government land.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Reddy. I'd like to propose 2 amendments, which has been sent to officers.
Thank you. Can you confirm that those are the amendments that you wish to propose?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Councillor Lawrence, are those amendments acceptable to you? And Councillor Greco, are they acceptable to you?
Yes, they're acceptable.
Thank you. And Councillor Greco? Yep. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Newton. That's now become the motion. We've heard from the mover and the seconder. Are there further speakers? No, there being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. And that brings us to item 10.4, Tackling Darebin's Chronic Disease Challenge. I'll take that as moved by you, Councillor Lawrence. Is there a seconder for that?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Councillor Greco. Thank you. Councillor Lawrence.
Mayor Reddy, I was going to move a slight amendment to this, but given the late hour, I'm not going to, but I'll speak to what I was going to change. The intent of this motion is that we basically get some kind of picture about the health deficiencies that a enhanced or redeveloped, expanded, whatever, Reservoir Leisure Centre could actually achieve. And I don't think we're actually asking for bringing in a $250,000 report on health and all that. Hospitals do that. There's a lot of data out there. So I'm just sort of not trying to launch a royal commission here. I'm not putting figures on it, but, you know, I would have thought it was about pulling together secondary research data. And I would have also thought that the swimming pool industry itself, the aqua industry itself would have, you know, some figures about activities and impacts on some of these chronic conditions. Obviously, we're talking stroke. Liver cancer is running at 75%, lung cancer is running at 25%, diabetes, which are these peaking diseases. And interestingly, there is a lot of data. There's Northcote is peaks with liver cancer. So, yes, it also is another hotspot. But there's also things that are below the national average. So some critical illnesses and chronic illnesses that are below the national average, and there's some that are not. So I'm not... but we need to have that kind of information, and obviously the issues about childhood obesity and long-term effects of creating more usage of Learn to Swim and more aqua play and those type of possibilities. So that's data I've not seen, and I suppose that's what I've had to be on my bonnet about this, is to get this kind of data while we're considering these things so that we get away from the traditional notion, and sometimes we've had it in this chamber, previous councils, that the pool should be somewhere you can go and have a swim, have an ice cream, and one council even suggested have a smoke. But I'm saying we're moving away from that trinity, and it's actually the hospitals are referring everyone, go to your pool and get better. So, like, we should take on that health and wellbeing role. You might remember.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. The days of smoking at the pool are gone. Councillor Greco.
I remember a councillor that actually was insisting on having a smoking space at a pool, at the Dark Centre. But on a more serious thing, look, I think this motion is worthy of some attention. I think the data will enable us to have a much broader perspective on how we envisage or how we imagine the Reservoir Leisure Centre into the future. I think up until now, and I've been quite vocal about this at briefings and council meetings, I think the approach that we are taking to make a decision on the Reservoir Leisure Centre is a very narrow approach. It's a very sort of cost accounting or engineering approach, and I think that we need to have a more holistic mindset in making these important decisions. I think, capital planning and capital works are not just about capital. What they are about, they're a key opportunity in order to connect various other social outcomes around them. And I think our thinking has to extend to that. I know that we try to do that, but I see this as a real opportunity with the Reservoir Leisure Centre in having that holistic approach to how we expend our capital funds. And so here's an opportunity for council to actually intervene in that space. A lot of our policies actually talk about, our social policies actually talk about impacting on our capital works program from a socio-economic perspective, from a health perspective, and from many other perspectives in order to have, if you like, a quadruple bottom line approach to how we actually then deliver not only on bricks and mortar, but what that actually can do to lift the community.
That's time, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
I realise the hour is late and I haven't spoken for a little while, so I had to get up. But also I I actually would just commend Councillor Lawrence on putting forward this motion and support the broad notion that if we're going to do something, we do it well, do it properly, and do it based on sound evidence. So I think that there's great merit in that argument. I do think we need to be honest in the fact that the piece of work could become bigger than simply a literature review, and I think that we need to be fair-minded about that. That in fact, when you start to ask questions about asset-based outcomes, so looking at how you make a new asset or a revitalised asset deliver on health outcomes, that's a very big question. To do that well and to do that with legitimacy and integrity to the community that we wish to serve in this case, not just the current community but future communities, is actually a really big thing. And I think if we're honest about that and acknowledge that up front, we don't know where this will take us, and it may take us to a differently configured facility, a differently focused facility, and potentially a delayed redevelopment. And I think if we're honest about that, but we wish to proceed in that direction, that's fine, because the outcome we'll get in the end will be ideally better than not. I should probably declare a conflict of interest in relation to Councillor Lawrence's comments about smoking at the pool, because I once wrote a song about that proposal that did not win a Green Room Award, but certainly I still have the lyrics, which I'll circulate to councillors.
Smoking what?
But we do joke about these things, about smoking at Northcote Pool, which was the election platform of a former mayor. And I'll end on that note.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? I think we would put that to the vote before anyone else pipes up with a story. Okay, all those in favour? That motion is carried. 10.5. Councillor Lawrence, I'll take that as moved by you. Is there a seconder?
I'm happy to second it.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, this follows on from a proposal that we put forward, I think at ALGA or at MAV in the pre-federal election, and what it focuses on, a perennial problem, is that while we've got to slow down policies around schools, there are some places, obviously McFadden Avenue, Bunbury Road, Cheddar Road, where we have ageing communities and, Preston High Street, ageing communities conflicting with traffic. And there's an incredible amount of people over 65 years who turn up in those pedestrian deaths or pedestrian injuries. So we didn't obviously get successful in terms of anyone picking that up. But I suppose I'm saying whether that filter can be applied at a local level. I understand we still come up against Vic roads on roads like Cheddar Road, but I suppose this is trying to make that visible again, the problem of roads that are too fast in areas with a high number of people over 65 who are very active and walking.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Greco.
I have nothing further to add at this point, so I reserve my right to speak. Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers?
Mayor, I'd like to move an amendment which officers have the wording for.
Councillor Lawrence, if you could take a minute to look at that, and Councillor Greco, and let me know if that's acceptable.
Sorry, Mayor, just it should be point one should be, sorry, notes should be, the number one should be before
Notes
and then
one
two
that council and then 2 and 3. Okay.
It's a minor thing, but it's just the motion of the motion. And also it should say program, focused on.
Councillor Lawrence, is that acceptable?
Yes, I think that adds some depth to it.
Thank you. Councillor Greco?
Yeah, look, if
Okay, thank you. So that's now the motion. Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor McCarthy, would you like to speak to the motion?
Only just to commend Councillor Lawrence on his initiative in bringing this to us. I'm also happy to let councillors know that in putting forward, obviously, this concept of advocating for grey spots, you know, that's been met with support from many MAV delegates. The problem that we have is that the action on the ground is sorely lacking. And just to come back to that notion of public health, which we were alluding to broadly, this is actually infrastructure that supports health, and that's why I'm really pleased that we were able to do a decision earlier this evening to bring forward $1 million in footpath works, which I think is worth recognising. That actually connects up some of those links that were not available to people because of gaps in the pedestrian network. And this is really about actually having that targeted approach. I just would also note one more thing, which I think councillors who are new to this term of council weren't aware of. In previous terms, council has won awards through the TAC through its Safe Travel Plan because of the targeted investment and focus on vulnerable road users and pedestrians as well, particularly older residents. So we have a good track record, and I think we need to acknowledge that, but there's always more work to be done, and the work should be smart and focused on those places where we need it most.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Greco, would you like to speak?
Yeah, just a few points that I'll add. Look, I think it's important that we move in this direction of what has been suggested here, and because I think it's we saw from the Streets for People report, it was actually mentioned throughout that report that people over 65 or people over 60 from memory are the ones that are prone to a lot of accidents on the street, and so I think it's important that that this sort of work is done, particularly because of that cohort of people that are affected by the movement of vehicles across streets. So I commend the motion.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? There are none. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to 10.7. I'll take that as moved by Councillor Greco. Is there a seconder? I'm going to have to call it lapsed. Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Greco.
Okay, saved by the bell there. Yeah, look, this motion, I think it's very similar to the motion that we previously passed that Councillor Lawrence was referring to about the health outcomes. I suppose this takes a perspective from looking at socio-economic disadvantage. And again, it's about sort of broadening our vision on how we invest money into capital works and how we can have an impact, particularly from a socio-economic perspective, given that we already know, I mean, the data shows us that that area of, you know, the northern part of our city, particularly Reservoir, is relative to other areas of Darebin, and also in some extent in state terms, there is socio-economic disadvantage. I don't like using that word, but it's, you know, we've got to call a spade, and that's the reality. And I think that what we need to do and really think hard about as councillors is that our capital works program has to go towards improving those areas from a physical amenity perspective. And here's an opportunity to do that by getting this additional data that then provides the, if you like, the evidence. I frankly feel that you know, you don't have to be an Einstein to work out that if you invest millions of dollars in a particular area, that's going to uplift the area. That's why we have so many, some areas in Melbourne that are so wealthy, and that's why they're uplifted, because of the amount of infrastructure that they have. So anyway, let's do this work, that then also that work can assist us in making our decisions. And I also feel that work may assist us in order to attract both state and federal funding to make the Reservoir Leisure Centre redevelopment actually happen.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Lawrence.
Madam Mayor, I suppose one of the things that comes up often talking to people in Reservoir about the pool and the gym is that for a lot of people, the cost is actually a barrier. So we've had figures in the past. I'm not sure what the updated figures are, but gym membership being half what it is up there than down there, and that reflects demographics and awareness about fitness and those sorts of things. But it also reflects that people have less money. I remember one of the surveys we did. A mother of a few children said, well, the costs of a swim can affect whether or not she has money for a cup of tea or coffee to socialise. Of course, we actually don't have much food or anything there at the moment at all. The machine's broken again, by the way. So 50% of the taps in the change rooms too. So one of the things about that is a watermark type development where the casual swim goes up to $13 or something is really not appropriate in that kind of community. And so that's why this sort of thinking's needed.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there any further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. So that brings us to 10.8. I'll take that as moved by Councillor Greco. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Messina.
Mayor Reddy, I'll speak briefly. I think the motion is quite. But before I just wanted to make a slight amendment to the dates to the motion, rather than January, because I've looked now at the meeting times to put the February there.
Okay, I'll.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for that, Councillor Greco. Over to you.
Yeah. Okay. Look, I think the motion is quite self-explanatory. Some councillors may say, well, we've already looked at this and we've already considered this, and why are we considering it again? And look, I feel that it's really important that we just can't sort of tread water, and excuse the pun, about the lake and sort of say, well, yeah, we know that the water's contaminated. We know it's a big problem. We know that the street water that goes into the lake, we can't sort of control that. We know that upstream that there's water coming from the industrial areas, and that's a difficult thing to control. But we know that this lake is the second biggest lake in Victoria, in the Melbourne metropolitan area. And we know that over 130, 140,000 people use the park on an annual basis. And we know it's a very much loved part of Darebin. Actually, it was referred to as the jewel of the city. And I think from an environmental perspective, we just can't allow the lake to sort of say, well, it's too hard of a problem, let's not deal with it, let's just monitor the water, making sure that it doesn't go above a certain level and things like that. I really think that we've got a huge potential there, and what I'm seeking in this motion is that some sort of scoping report that can indicate to us what we need to do in order to improve the quality of the lake. And if this motion passes, I didn't want to write it all into the motion, but I'm hoping that officers not only explore what we can do as a council, because the issue is beyond the council. I acknowledge that, because it will require millions and millions of dollars. But how can we buy in the state government in relation to assisting us in fixing this lake? Because the problems are not just within Darebin, as I mentioned before. The contamination occurs because of its where it is positioned regionally. So there is an opportunity there to work out a strategy that we work towards in order that we need to do some of the initial work, and then as a result of that, buy in the state government or even the federal government to actually assist us in doing it. We've done this sort of work before. The Reservoir Rail Crossing, the rail crossings in Preston were as a direct result of our advocacy and compiling a report, putting it to the state government and attracting then their buy-in to make things happen. And I think that's what we need to do. Otherwise, we just could say, well, look, forget about the boathouse, forget about the lake, and we'll just make sure that, people don't dip their toe into the lake, because they could get gangrene as a result of it.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Messina.
When you think of Darebin, you think of two things. First of all, the Preston Market, and secondly, Edwards Park Lake. I think this is, and I know there's some works that have been undertaken during this council term, but if you look, if I'm a resident of Darebin, I really, prior to this term, I've seen no movement at Edwards Park Lake. This is us initiating that movement. We need to do this. It's the second largest asset for community in the municipality. It is underutilised, and that boathouse has been on the agenda for I don't know how many decades, just like the extension of the 11 tram that gets neglected as well. I think this is a positive move forward. It is an asset that the state government need to consider. It is not considering it, and it needs to, and this is a move forward to say this is an asset, the community wants it, we want it to be developed into an area that is user-friendly, and we need to recognise it, and the state government also needs to recognise it. So I want to say thank you to Councillor Greco for putting it on the table.
Councillor Lawrence?
I just have an amendment.
Yep.
2 words. 2 words to go in point 2 after the word lake, just and wetlands.
And wetlands. Councillor Greco, is that acceptable?
Yeah, I'm happy with that.
Councillor Messina? Yes. Yep, okay, so that's been accepted. Are there any further speakers? Councillor McCarthy, and then I'll go to you.
Just going to propose an amendment just to insert on point 3 the word state government before the word options.
So receives a council report in late February 2008 on state government options. Is that acceptable to the mover? And is it acceptable to the seconder?
I can't accept that, no.
Okay, so that hasn't been accepted.
I'll move that as a formal amendment then.
Okay, that's been moved. Is there a seconder for that amendment? Seconded by Councillor Newton. Councillor McCarthy?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor Greco has made the point that the reality of the situation is that the water that comes into Edwards Lake is not actually something that council has great control over. In fact, the water flow, the water authorities, in this case Melbourne Water, the water catchment that feeds into Edwards Lake, in fact, council has limited control over as well, as council would be aware. We do have control and some influence over what happens with stormwater, but we are also limited by the industrial activities, some of which are actually overseen through agencies like the EPA. In each of these cases, we're talking about water quality issues and pollution issues which are actually beyond the immediate remit of council. When we talk about a project like this, as councillors would be well aware, and we have had reports on this exact issue, I have no objection for council advocating for the improvement to Edwards Lake, but I think we need to be honest with the community about the massive expense that this will involve, and the fact that the levers to actually achieve the outcomes that Councillor Greco has rightly described here are actually not within council's power. So let's be frank about this. If we want to achieve this outcome, and I am committed to this outcome, we need to speak to the level of government which actually has control over both pollution and the regulation of pollution, and water quality, water flow and stormwater management issues that are actually beyond what council's own capital program could even do, because it is a massive undertaking. I have been involved and I've worked in this space in a previous life in relation to the regeneration of these sorts of sites, and it is striking that it has taken a long time for anything to happen, and there's a reason for it. It's not because of a lack of community interest or will. I know how passionate people are about Edwards Lake and how frustrated that some feel about the inaccessibility in that respect, in terms of being on the water rather than around the water. Likewise, the boathouse is something that has been on this council's agenda since my time, and even before that. Councillor Greco has championed it passionately. I would never take that away from him, but I think we need to be frank that the two things are related, and some of the proposals for being able to revitalise the boathouse have actually relied upon the water quality issues. So I would ask councillors to be targeted in our advocacy and not actually set up false expectations that council can somehow flick a switch, spend a large amount of money in a very short space of time and get the outcome, when the two agencies that have more influence on this are actually not in our level but are in state level.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Newton.
Sorry, before we go on, I just wanted to clarify, because I don't know if I have a conflict of interest to this matter now that it has been amended.
It hasn't been amended yet.
Well, but I shouldn't participate in the debate to amend it. My husband has a conflicting duty with this, so it's by association, so I would have a conflict of interest. Yeah, okay.
Okay, so Councillor Lesueur, thank you for highlighting that. We'll just wait for you to leave the room. And then I'll ask so we're on the debate on the amendment. If the amendment...
Can I speak to the amendment?
No, Councillor Newton may wish to speak. If Councillor Newton doesn't wish to speak, then I'll go to you, but Councillor Newton is the seconder.
Be very brief. Just on the amendment, I do think that this is something that is worth going to the state government rather than us. I know that we've spent a lot of time looking into the water quality already, and I do think that it's worth pushing to state government, not us doing more.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence, you'd like to speak to the amendment?
I know it's getting late, but I'll just speak to it a bit. I'm speaking in favour of it, but I think we'll get to the main amendment, the main bodies at some point. I think people are lacking a bit of information on the lake. In 1998, it had botulism. That is, it was killing wildlife, dogs and other things. That's pretty much a third world type disease. So because it was dug shallow, like Albert Park Lake, it created an anaerobic environment. And those organisms are deep. They're up to 30 feet deep in that mud. They are now controlled because you did a major redevelopment of the lake where we drained the whole lake and altered the bottom so it was a variation, and we also added aeration to it. So I think people need to understand that. Number two, we didn't cart away the soil because it's full of mercury, and the cost would have been then, I think, 3 times the actual project cost, which was $10 million to cut away the stuff. I think it was done for about 3.5, 4 million, I've forgotten. So it's been re-engineered to combat botulism. It remains full of heavy metals. But the principal thing here is, it goes to the amendment, is the sediment coming down is a byproduct of 200,000 people being added to Whittlesea. And it is a byproduct of developers. So I'd like to see state government, developers and federal government involved, because it's a major sediment problem coming down.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Before we go any further, I will ask for another continuance of time. Councillor, moved.
Sorry, I'm not.
You're not, okay. Moved by Councillor Greco, seconded by Councillor Newton, who had a hand in the air. All those in favour? And against? That motion is carried, so we're heading for 11:30. I've heard from some movers to this amendment. Are there any further speakers to the amendment?
I'll move another amendment or foreshadow.
No, well, we have to deal with this amendment first. So, any further speakers to this amendment?
I'll speak. Look, I'll speak in relation to the amendment. Look, I understand the point that Councillor McCarthy has made, which is sort of taken off from the points that I was making when I was moving this motion. And but I think just having the focus on the state government, whilst that I understand that it's pretty clear that is critical, but I think, like other projects where we've got traction, is that we've got to have skin in the game as a council. Otherwise, just saying that, oh, the state government ought to do this, then it just becomes like a ping pong match and just a pure sort of advocacy, letter writing and things like that. We know that doesn't go far. I mean, the experience has shown that where the council rolls up its sleeves, does some serious work, and I don't mean like work actually of improving the lake, but where it provides some preliminary reports, a bit exactly like we did with the rail crossings, where we spent some money, got people to actually do some engineering reports, and then that gives us evidence base to actually impact on the state government and the other parties to sit down around the table and do things. But just to say to the state government, you need to deal on this. We tell the state government to deal with a lot of things, and we know that often they just ignore us. We need to have skin in the game, and that's why we need to focus on what council can do relative to other stakeholders. So just finally say, look, that I understand the sentiment, but I think let's just stay focused. And my motion, the original motion, encompasses obviously that vision or that focus on the state government.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers to the amendment? There being none, I'll put the amendment to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That amendment is carried. So we'll now return to debate on the motion.
I'll move amendment. I think I'm not a seconder.
Yes, what's the amendment, Councillor Lawrence? I can't have a seconder until I've got the amendment. The seconder to the substantive motion was Councillor Messina.
Yes. So my amendment is just that the word state government is replaced with council, state and federal government.
Yeah, I'm happy to accept that, yes.
Okay, so that's now the motion.
Amendment.
Yes, but the amendment's been accepted by the mover and the seconder, so that is now the motion in front of us. So we'll return to debate on the motion, the substantive motion, which is now as listed. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Lyons.
Yes, Mayor Rennie. So as I was giving some background in the amendment process, I'll continue, is that what we're facing there in terms of concern about contact is the silt coming down from these massive developments is, ironically, the developments treat their own stormwater. They treat their own stormwater and they have sophisticated designs that we didn't have in our establishment of reservoir in the 70s. But what happens is while they're creating those massive suburbs, they are pouring silt into the Edgars Creek. And that has been cost the council millions and millions with 2 different treatments of the silt traps and that whole wetlands area. And so when the last one was completed, I asked Melbourne Water, why the first one failed and how we're going with the second one. And they said to me, the wetlands is needs to be 10 times larger to filter out the rubbish and silt coming down from Whittlesea. So I'm probably not explaining this properly. So it's not that there's just some industrial pollutants which EPA pick up coming from neighbouring factories. That's an issue in the Darebin Creek, as we know, and elsewhere. The problem is you've got a massive development area now extending all the way up past Woolert that is pouring sediment through there, and that's causing the choking of the wetlands and causes the anaerobic organisms. Now, you've also got, obviously, a report will come into it, you've got heavy metal from batteries and mercury in there as well. So that's why it's not recommended to eat. So there's a range of pollutants there, but the major one is that our water system is being impacted by urban development with an off-site impact.
That's time, thank you. Further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That motion is carried. That brings us to 10.9, report on the feasibility on council becoming a provider of aged care. We'll get that on the, we'll get Kim's coming back. So, yes, Councillor Messina?
I have a conflict on this item.
Thank you. I think
The
you
conflict,
declared what that
yeah.
was, if you just fill out the paper. I'll take that as moved by Councillor Greco. Is there a seconder?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Councillor Greco.
Thanks, Mayor Rennie. Look, I'm moving this motion because I think it's time that the and before I move the motion, Mayor Rennie, I just want to move the motion with a slight amendment to it.
Okay.
Yeah, just one is again the January with February, and then 2020 on scoping the feasibility and options. Scoping the feasibility and options.
Okay, thank you. I'll just check in with the seconder again that he remains happy to second the motion with those.
Yeah,
Okay, thank
sorry,
you. Councillor Greco, over to you.
Okay, look, thank you for that. Look, I think it's time for council to start to seriously consider whether we can or whether and what the to start to scope out so that we can become informed about whether it's appropriate for us to become a home package service provider. And I think it's timely that we do this, because if we were to move in this direction, it's not like something that you snap your fingers and tomorrow you become a home package service provider. It would take a lot of time to do that. And whilst in the current system we have still a little bit of time, I think we need to do some preliminary work, and that's why I've used the word scoping, in order just to see what it actually involves for us to move in that direction. Why I say that, I mean, we've all seen and all heard comments that are coming out of the Aged Care Royal Commission, and what's in those comments, apart from the human drama that we see, is that residential care, seems to be in a shamble with many of the providers, and how people are driven into residential care because home care is sometimes seen to be inadequate. And I think that it's important for an organisation like a council that has a strong reputation, a trustworthy organisation, to actually see how we can position ourselves in that space. And I appreciate the information that's been provided to us from our officers, and I understand that some councils have already moved in this direction. And then I think that's something that we need to learn from them, scope out what they've been doing, and see how we can apply that to ourselves. And I say that on the back of that Darebin Council was at the forefront of providing aged care services to their community. We were the state leaders. And as a result of being the state leaders, we were the national leaders in providing home care services to our community. So we're in a strong position to actually, if there was a political will, to move in that direction. So I think it's important that we do a bit of that work there. Now the question is that it may be argued that, well, we already got a trial. Yes, I understand that we do have a trial, but let's distinguish. That trial is about not council becoming a service provider, it's council providing services to a service provider, which is distinctly different. The two are related, yes, but it's distinctly different to what is being proposed there. What is being proposed there is not a duplication, but it's distinctly different from actually providing services to a service provider. Why don't we explore the opportunity of actually becoming a home care package service provider?
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Lawrence.
Briefly, Madam Mayor. Yes, I understand we're doing the test case and tipping our toes in the water, but I'm concerned we've created expectations from the committee and the wider community that test case is going to turn into a commitment to be a player. So I think we need to actually focus on staying in there, on being, the ABC in this, potentially scary, deregulated world, and providing the quality in that environment.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Any further speakers?
Sorry, just not to speak, but to move an amendment to this, which officers should have. And I'll just read out the amendment so that, that Council 1 receives the council report on the benefits and options on council becoming a home care packages provider. And 2, notes that council has committed to a trial of providing services to people receiving. That's the one. Yep. So those crossed out bits don't need to be there though.
I don't think it matters because this is now the proposal. Can you confirm, Councillor McCarthy, that this is the amended?
This is the amendment, but where it has strike through, those just were, obviously, to be clear, those words shouldn't appear at all. So it should read, receives a council report
on the benefits and options.
Just so that no one's confused. And the feasibility and shouldn't be there as well.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Greco and Councillor Lawrence, is that acceptable to you?
Yeah, I'm happy to accept that.
Councillor Lawrence? Okay, that's now the motion. We've heard from the mover and seconder. Are there any further speakers?
Just only just to add, and thank you to both the mover and seconder. Very keen to see how we go with the trial. We have put as has rightly been pointed out, put a toe in the water here in relation to one aspect of this, but we haven't gone the whole hog. I think that gives us a really important and rich bit of what we might describe as consumer data in that process, so we make a more considered decision in terms of where we position ourselves, and hence point 2, which really sets us up to actually have that insight from having been involved in this space. I think it'll be quite insightful and instructive to work from an evidence base from our community, and who knows where the Royal Commission findings will be at that stage.
Thank you, Councillor
I just have a question, if I may, through you, Mayor Rennie. When do we expect the existing trial to finish?
I'll ask Ms Henderson that.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, it's expected that services would start being provided to clients from about February, and that I think that the trial, I'm not sure that the end date has been defined yet, but the idea is that there'd be 40 clients serviced for a period enough that we can evaluate it. So it'd have to be at least 3 or 4 months long, I think.
Thank you.
Just a further question is that, is there any indication, just to give the motion some date there, because there's no date when the report will come back, is there any indication of when, what month are we talking about, 2020, 2021, 2022? Just to get some indication of when that trial will be finished.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, my apologies, definitely 2020. Yeah.
But do we know when? Sorry, where in 2020?
So it'd be sometime between, I think, May and October, but I'm not sure of the absolute date. And it depends a little bit. It'll be an action project as it goes as well.
Thank you for that response. So are there any further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to the end of notices of motion, because we've previously done 10.10. So we're now on reports of standing committees. There are none. Records of assemblies of councillors, moved by Councillor Lasserf, seconded by Councillor McCarthy. All those in favour? Oh, sorry, I don't think she'll mind having missed the records of assemblies, but we'll fill her in. I'll ask her if she wants to go back and do it again. Councillor Messina, welcome back. I confess that we did records of assemblies of councillors while you were still coming in. Would you like us to do it again, or are you happy for us to proceed? Thank you. That brings us to reports by mayors and councillors. All those moved by Councillor Surf, seconded by Councillor McCarthy. All those in favour? That brings us to consideration of reports considered confidential.
I move that we move into camera.
Thank you,
Can
Councillor.
I just work out procedurally what's happened here? Because it hasn't been distributed to every councillor, because I don't get a hard copy, so therefore the agenda hasn't been distributed to me in the form that you're proposing to proceed with. And is it that we need to consider it as an urgent business item? Well, it's not on the agenda. On the shortened version of the agenda that's in the Dropbox.
You don't have page 14 in the Dropbox,
No.
page 14, isn't
No.
it? Okay. No, because it's confidential.
No, but it's showing that there's an item that's being considered.
Okay, can I seek advice on a pathway forward?
Mayor Rennie, it's true that...
And should we move into camera before we do this pathway forward?
Can I ask, can we not,
Okay.
can we admit an item
Okay.
if we need to?
Yeah, we can.
The question is how we deal with it. It's not really broken.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, look, for ease of operation, a motion to admit an item of urgent business, if that's satisfactory for everyone, I think that's reasonable. But also, it is listed in terms of listed in the hard copy agenda. It's listed in that document there, which is an agenda that's been provided to all councillors. So I don't believe there's any risk in you dealing with it tonight, either way.
So just a further question on that. The only risk that I foresee is that it wasn't listed in the public agenda, and while that the local law doesn't actually say that it needs to be distributed to the public, it says every councillor, I think that that's something that we need to be conscious of. And the item is being considered in camera, so they would have very little information about what we would be discussing.
Councillor McCarthy?
Yeah, just to be abundantly clear, I'd like to move an urgent motion that item 14.1, compulsory acquisition of the right-of-way of 16 to 20 Dumbarton Street Reservoir, be included on the agenda and marked confidential as per.
Okay, can I have a second?
Can I ask a question before we second it? Just from a governance perspective, so that we get this right, guys. Because we've already dealt with urgent items, can we revisit the urgent part of the agenda or not?
I think the council through by resolution can. I think the council by resolution can deal with that.
So, through you, Mayor Rennie, my advice would be it's not great practice, but you can suspend standing orders in order to do that. The truth is, council, it's not ideal that this item hasn't been distributed consistently across the documents. I'm not sure what the cause is. I genuinely don't know what the system problem is, but I'll look into that tomorrow. If council is concerned about considering it, we can also not consider it and have it considered at the next council meeting.
So just, if I, given that I have a motion on the table, just to be clear, this can safely be considered at the next council meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah. In that case, I'd withdraw that motion to admit it as an urgent item and let it be dealt with at the next meeting.
Okay. On that basis, I'll take that as advice that we've had. It can safely be considered. Do we need a motion to actually withdraw it?
A motion that item 4.1 be deferred.
14.1.
14.1 be deferred to the next meeting.
Alternatively, I could withdraw it.
Why don't we just let the CEO withdraw it? That's simplest. Is that okay?
I'll withdraw it with apologies.
I think it's easiest if we just...
No, you're going
Yeah, right.
to legally
Ask
contested environment.
Thank you. That brings us to the close of the meeting. Thank you, councillors. It's been a marathon effort that we've got.
Happy birthday, Suzanne.
There's cake.